There was a time when you didn't know you could be hurt. Not physically. Everyone learns that eventually. The scrape, the bruise, the sharp edge that cuts skin. But there was a time before you knew you could be hurt in other ways. Before you knew words could wound. Before you understood that silence could reject. Before you realized that being seen could feel like being exposed. There was a time when you simply existed. Before the mirror. Before the comparison. Before the quiet voice that asks if you're enough. And then something changed. Not all at once. Not with ceremony or announcement. Just a slow awareness creeping in, like water rising, like daylight fading. And you can never remember the exact moment it happened, only that it did. What if that moment, that shift from innocence to awareness, wasn't an accident? What if it was designed that way? Innocence feels sacred. We protect it in children. We mourn its loss in ourselves. We speak of it like something stolen, something that should have lasted. But what if innocence was never meant to be permanent? What if it's not something precious that we failed to preserve, but something temporary that we were always meant to outgrow? Think about what innocence really is. It's not purity, it's not goodness, it's not virtue. Innocence is the absence of awareness. A child who has never been betrayed is not wise. They are simply unaware that betrayal exists. A mind that has never questioned is not at peace. It simply doesn't know there are questions. Innocence is a state before knowing, before understanding, before the weight of choice settles into your bones. And once you know, once you truly understand, innocence doesn't just fade, it becomes impossible. We left Adam standing outside Eden. In the first telling, we watched him bite the fruit, watched awareness flood into a mind that had never held it before, watched him step from one state of being into another. But we didn't stay with him after. We didn't watch what happens when innocence ends and awareness begins its work. So let's return. Not to the moment of choice, but to the moment after. Adam stands in the same garden. The trees haven't changed. The light falls the same way. The air smells of earth and growth. Nothing external has shifted, but everything is different. He looks at his hands. The same hands that reached for the fruit, the same hands that have touched bark and water and soil since the beginning. But now he sees them differently. Before, his hands were simply part of the world, tools without thought, extensions of being. Now they are his, separate, observable. He can see the lines in his palms, the dirt under his nails, the way his fingers curl and straighten. And in that seeing, something fractures. There is the hand, and there is the one watching the hand. Two where there was once only one. Time begins, not as measurement, not yet, but as awareness of passage. Before, there was only now, an eternal present with no past to compare it to, no future to anticipate. But awareness brings memory, and memory brings comparison. He remembers the moment before he bit the fruit, can compare it to this moment now, can feel the difference. And in feeling that difference, he becomes aware that moments are not all the same, that they flow, that they pass, that they can be lost. This is the birth of time, not the thing itself, but the ability to perceive it, to feel it moving, to fear its passage. Silence feels different now. Before, silence was simply the absence of sound, neutral, unremarkable. But now silence has weight, because now he is aware of himself within it, can hear his own breath, his own heartbeat, can feel the space between one moment and the next. Silence becomes something that can be filled, or avoided, or feared. It becomes a space where thoughts echo, where questions form, where awareness turns inward and examines itself. He tries to return to the state before, closes his eyes, breathes deeply, attempts to simply be as he once was. But he can't. Because trying requires awareness of what you're trying to do. And awareness of trying is itself the problem. You cannot unknow, you cannot unsee. You cannot return to a state you are now aware of having lost. The very act of trying to return proves you have already left. Choice gains weight. Before the fruit, there were actions, simple, direct. Hunger led to eating, thirst led to drinking, no pause between impulse and action. But now there is space, a gap between wanting and doing, a moment where he can ask, should I? And in that gap lives all of human struggle, because once you can ask, should I, you must answer. And answering requires judgment, comparison, evaluation of consequence. Every choice becomes a weight. Every action carries the knowledge that another action was possible, that you chose this over that you are responsible. Responsibility. The word doesn't exist yet, won't exist for thousands of years. But the feeling is there, born in that first moment of awareness, the understanding that your choices matter, that they shape what happens next, that you cannot hide behind ignorance or innocence anymore. You know, and knowing makes you accountable. He looks for Eve. She stands near the tree, fruit in her own hand, and he sees something he has never seen before, her separateness. Before, she was simply part of the world, no distinction clear enough to create distance. But now he sees her as other, as different, as someone who can see him, judge him, know him. And in that seeing, something new is born, the desire to be seen favorably, and the fear of being seen clearly. Shame appears, not because he has done something wrong, not because of immorality or sin, but because he is now aware of being observable. He looks down at himself, sees his body, his nakedness. Before, nakedness was neutral, the natural state. No reason to notice it, much less hide it. But now he sees himself as he imagines she sees him. And in that imagined gaze, vulnerability is born. Shame is not about the body. It's about the sudden awareness that you exist as an object in someone else's perception, that you can be judged, compared, found wanting, that the self you experience from within is not the same as the self others see from without, and you cannot control what they see. So he covers himself, with leaves, with distance, with silence, not to hide his body, but to hide the vulnerability that awareness has created. The exposure is internal, the covering is futile. This is the breaking point, not a moment, a process. Innocence doesn't shatter, it doesn't vanish in an instant. It fades, slowly, like color draining from cloth left too long in the sun. Each new awareness removes another layer. Each realization creates another distance between what was and what is. Until one day, or maybe 1,000 days, you realize it's gone completely. And you can't remember exactly when it left, only that it did. Why can't knowledge and innocence coexist? It seems like they should be able to. Seems like you could know things and still remain untouched by them. But knowledge changes the knower. Always. Knowledge creates comparison. Once you know that things can be different than they are, you begin to measure. This tree versus that tree, this day versus yesterday, this feeling versus the feeling you had before. And in measuring, you create hierarchy, better and worse, more and less, enough and not enough. Comparison is the death of contentment, because contentment requires acceptance of what is, and comparison is the endless evaluation of what could be. Comparison creates insecurity, because once you measure, you can be measured. Once you rank, you can be ranked. Once you know that some things are better than others, you must confront the possibility that you are not among the better, that others might have more, know more, be more. And insecurity is the root of all human suffering. Insecurity creates fear. Fear of loss, fear of inadequacy, Fear of being seen clearly and found lacking. And fear drives almost every human behavior that follows. Fear creates control, because if you are afraid, you seek to manage the sources of your fear. You try to control what others see, what they think, what they know. You try to control resources so you won't lose them. You try to control people so they won't leave. You try to control information so you won't be exposed. Control is fear's answer to vulnerability. And control creates harm, because control requires force, manipulation, the bending of another's will to serve your fear. And in that bending, damage is done. Not always visible, not always immediate, but harm nonetheless. So the chain is complete. Knowledge, comparison, insecurity, fear, control, harm. And it all begins with awareness, with knowing, with the end of innocence. This is why they cannot coexist. Not because knowledge is evil, not because innocence is sacred, but because awareness changes the nature of existence itself. You cannot know and remain unchanged by knowing. You cannot see and remain unseen. You cannot understand and retain the peace of not understanding. Adam realizes this. Not consciously, not in words, but he feels it. The impossibility of return, the permanence of what has happened. And he does what every human has done since. He hides, not just from Eve, not just from himself. He hides from the presence, from God. We must be careful here. This is not a story of anger, not punishment, not divine rage at disobedience. This is something quieter, more essential. This is about the incompatibility of states. God does not change. There is no surprise, no shock, no sense of betrayal. God has always known, will always know. The question God asks is not for God's benefit. It's for Adam's, because Adam needs to speak his new state into existence, needs to articulate what has changed, needs to say it aloud so he can begin to understand it. Afraid, naked, hidden. 3 words that didn't exist in Eden before. 3 concepts born from awareness. And God asks another question, not an accusation, an invitation to trace the origin. Who told you? No one. Knowledge told him. Awareness told him. Comparison told him. The fruit told him. And then the final question. Again, not because God doesn't know, but because Adam needs to claim it, needs to own the choice, needs to step fully into responsibility. But Adam isn't ready. Deflection, blame, division of responsibility. The first fracture between humans, the beginning of all the fractures that would follow. Because awareness creates not just self-consciousness, but other consciousness. The ability to see others as separate, as potentially threatening, as useful for deflection. Eve does the same. Blame cascading down, because no one wants to carry the full weight alone, but the weight remains. Responsibility cannot be divided away, cannot be deflected, cannot be escaped through blame. The choice was made, the fruit was eaten, the awareness exists, and it cannot be undone. God speaks consequences, not punishments. Consequences. There is a difference. Punishment is retribution for wrongdoing. Consequence is the natural result of change. Adam has changed. The world must change in response. The ground will resist. Labor will be required. Survival will demand effort. Not because God is angry, but because awareness and Eden are incompatible. Eden is a state of effortless being. Awareness creates effort, creates the need to plan, to work, to struggle. The two cannot coexist. Childbirth will involve pain, not as curse, as consequence. Because creating life in a world of awareness means bringing consciousness into existence, means knowing that this child will suffer, will struggle, will one day die. And carrying that knowledge through the act of creation is its own kind of pain. And then the separation, not spoken in anger, in recognition. You cannot remain in innocence once you are aware. You cannot exist in timelessness once you perceive time. You cannot rest in effortless being once you know effort. The separation is not emotional, it's existential. Adam and Eve have become incompatible with the state they once inhabited, so they leave, and the garden remains, unchanged, still perfect, still innocent, still effortless. But they can never return, not because they are barred, but because they are different now. You cannot enter a state you have grown beyond, cannot shrink back into a form that no longer fits. And this pattern, this transition from innocence to awareness, doesn't belong only to Adam. It belongs to everyone. Every human life follows this arc. We are born innocent. Not good, not bad, just unaware. A newborn doesn't know they are separate from their mother, doesn't understand that the world is not an extension of their need. They exist in a kind of Eden, timeless, effortless, without awareness of mortality or consequence. And then awareness begins. Slowly, over years, they learn they are separate, that their body has boundaries, that they can want something and not receive it. They learn that others exist independently, have their own thoughts, their own desires. They learn that actions have consequences, that choices matter, that they are responsible. And somewhere in that process, innocence ends. You can't pinpoint when, can't identify the exact moment, but it happens. One day a child asks a question that reveals they are no longer innocent. And you realize they have crossed over, have stepped from the garden into the world. Adolescence is the full bloom of this transition, the desperate attempt to hold on to innocence while being dragged into awareness. The child's perspective colliding with adult knowledge, the comfort of ignorance colliding with the burden of understanding. And it hurts. Not because something is wrong, but because growing always hurts, because awareness always costs, because you cannot mature without leaving something behind. Maturity is the death of innocence, not metaphorically, literally. To become mature is to fully embrace awareness, to accept that you know things you wish you didn't, to carry the weight of understanding without collapsing under it. But what does maturity give you in return? Responsibility, burden, choice. The knowledge that you are shaping your own life, that your decisions matter, that you cannot hide behind ignorance or innocence anymore. Some would call this freedom, and maybe it is. But freedom is not comfort. Freedom is not ease. Freedom is the terrible weight of knowing you are choosing, every moment, every day, and that your choices create the shape of your existence. Is it worth it? We can't answer that. Some days it feels like yes, the ability to create, to love consciously, to choose meaning. Other days it feels like no, the burden too heavy, the knowledge too painful, the loss of innocence too great a price. But the question is irrelevant, because we don't get to choose. Innocence leaves whether we want it to or not. Awareness comes whether we invite it or not. We can only choose what we do with it after. Look at the world now. Humanity has chosen awareness at every turn. We chose education, chose to teach children more than survival, to fill their minds with knowledge of history, science, philosophy, to give them awareness of how much suffering has existed, how much still exists, how fragile everything is. We chose technology, invented tools to extend our senses, to see farther, to know more, to communicate instantly across any distance. And in doing so, we destroyed the last refuges of innocence. There is no hidden place anymore, no unknown, no mystery protected from exposure. We chose information, built systems to preserve and distribute knowledge, created networks where anyone can know anything, and we are drowning in it, overwhelmed by awareness, by comparison, by the constant flood of knowing. Social media is the fruit of knowledge made infinite. Every person can now see every other person, can compare their life to thousands of other lives, can measure themselves against an impossible standard. And the insecurity is crushing. The fear is paralyzing. The need for control is everywhere. We have lost collective innocence. There was a time when most people lived and died in the same small area, knew only their neighbors, compared themselves only to the few they could see. Limited awareness meant limited suffering. Limited comparison meant limited insecurity. But we chose to know, chose to see, chose to connect. And now we carry the weight of global awareness. We know about suffering on the other side of the world, about injustice we cannot fix, about problems too large for any individual to solve. And we feel responsible. Or we feel guilty for not feeling responsible. Either way, we cannot escape the knowledge, cannot return to ignorance. We have built a world that makes innocence impossible. And we did it on purpose. We call it progress. We call it enlightenment. We call it civilization. But another word for it is the end of innocence. And yet, we ache for it. Nostalgia is the longing for innocence, the desire to return to a time when things felt simpler, when we knew less, when the world felt smaller, safer, more manageable. We romanticize childhood, early relationships, times before we understood how complicated everything is. We look back and see Eden, but we forget that we weren't happy because things were better then. We were happy because we didn't know enough to be unhappy. Faith, for many, is an attempt to return, not to ignorance, but to a state where knowledge is held by someone else, where the burden of understanding can be surrendered, where awareness can rest in trust. There is comfort in that, real comfort. But it is not innocence, because you cannot unknow. Even faith requires the awareness of what you're choosing to trust. Some try to choose ignorance deliberately, to avoid news, to stop learning, to narrow their world until awareness shrinks to something manageable. And there is a logic to it, a survival strategy. Because too much awareness can break a person, can paralyze them with the weight of knowing. But chosen ignorance is not innocence. It's the awareness of knowledge you're refusing to accept. And that refusal carries its own weight, its own kind of knowledge. So we're trapped. Can't return to innocence, can't escape awareness, can't unknow what we know. All we can do is choose how we carry it. And maybe that's the point. Maybe innocence was never meant to last because it was never meant to be the goal. Maybe it was meant to be the beginning, the starting point, the thing you leave behind when you grow. Maybe meaning only exists on the other side of innocence. Maybe love only matters when you're aware it can end. Maybe choice only has weight when you understand the alternatives. Maybe life only feels precious when you know it's temporary. Adam couldn't stay in Eden. Not because he was unworthy, but because Eden was a place for innocence. And he was no longer innocent. He had stepped into awareness, into time, into consequence. And the only way forward was through. We can't stay either. We are born into awareness now, surrounded by knowledge from the beginning. We don't get an Eden to lose. We never had innocence the way Adam did. We are born already fallen, already aware, already carrying the weight. And maybe that's harder, or maybe it's a gift, because we don't have to mourn what we never had, don't have to ache for a return that was never possible. We can simply accept that this awareness, knowledge, responsibility is the condition of being human, and choose what we build with it. But that doesn't make it easier, doesn't make the weight lighter, doesn't erase the longing for a state we can barely imagine. Because somewhere deep inside we remember, not literally, not consciously, but we carry an echo of innocence, a ghost of what it felt like before awareness. And it calls to us. In moments of peace so complete we forget ourselves. In sleep, before dreams begin. In the rare moments when the mind is quiet and the world feels whole. But we can't stay there. We wake. We remember. We return to awareness. And the cycle continues. So what do we do with this? With the knowledge that innocence was never meant to last, that awareness is irreversible, that we can't go back. We carry it. We carry the weight of knowing, the burden of awareness, the responsibility of choice. And we try, however imperfectly, to make something meaningful with it. We create. We love. We build and break and rebuild. We hurt each other and heal each other. We fail and try again. We carry the knowledge that none of it may matter, and we choose to act as if it does anyway. Because maybe that's what it means to be human. To live in the space between innocence and oblivion. To carry awareness without being crushed by it. To know too much and choose to keep going anyway. Adam walked out of Eden, and he kept walking. Through pain and labor and loss, through creation and destruction, through every consequence that awareness brought. And humanity has been walking ever since. We will never reach Eden again. But maybe we were never supposed to. Maybe the point was always to walk, to carry the weight, to live with awareness, to choose despite knowing. Or maybe there is no point. Maybe innocence ends and awareness begins, and that's just what happens. No meaning, no design, no purpose. Just the inevitable progression from one state to another. We can't know. That's the final irony. We ate the fruit of knowledge, and we still don't know why. We only know we can't go back. We only know innocence is gone. We only know that every step forward is also a step away from something we can never reclaim. And maybe that's enough, or maybe it isn't. But we keep walking anyway, just like Adam, out of the garden, into the world, into awareness, into consequence, into the terrible, beautiful burden of knowing. And the question remains, the question that has no answer. The question that will follow us until the end. If you could choose to never have known, to remain innocent forever, to stay in the garden, untouched by awareness, never feeling the weight of choice or the burden of knowledge, never comparing, never fearing, never controlling, but also never truly choosing, never truly loving, never truly being responsible for the shape of your own existence, would you still choose to know?